both for joining us. And let's dive in immediately into how do we make reading fun. There have been more and more stories that the younger generation, even Gen Z and those who are following in their footsteps, aren't as enthusiastic about reading as their predecessors. When did that switch come off? Did it come off? When does it turn on? And what can we do to turn the tide, make reading more fun?
So my area of teaching is middle and high school more specifically.
Yeah.
And so that would be secondary education. Dominic, you being elementary, you could probably talk a little more to when in the elementary grades it seems to not get interesting for students.
Yeah, so I think what happens is sometime around second or third grade, they realize that they might not have the proper decoding and phonics strategies to actually read the words, and that's when it starts to get not fun, because it wouldn't be fun just to have something in front of you and just be struggling with it and constantly having to make it a challenge to actually just get through reading the words. And I think a lot of that happens because a lot of, well, not so much maybe now, but in the past, what's happened is a lot of the phonics and the foundational skills have been kind of skipped over in elementary school. Now with the emergence of science of reading and research that is really supporting foundational skills, phonics, phonological awareness, decoding, we're starting to see it more in elementary school, but for a while, even when I was teaching elementary school, and we were a very, very big balanced literacy district, but we weren't teaching foundational skills. We weren't teaching phonics. So we weren't actually teaching them how to read. We were just expecting that they would naturally pick up reading by giving them these really engaging, good, juicy, deep content area trade books, which is great. But if I can't understand what the words say, it becomes not fun very quickly.
So they're knowing the words by memorization, but not knowing.
So part of it is it's exactly what Dominic is talking about. A lot of it's the fluency, so the decoding, the automaticity, all that kind of stuff. So sometimes some teachers would actually go the opposite way of what Dominic's talking about and teach only that, but then the comprehension. So all of that is supposed to serve comprehension. So if you don't have comprehension, regardless of whether you're teaching all that or not, that's when, of course, reading becomes not fun. And it's not just reading, it's pretty much anything. If you are struggling at something, and no matter how hard you try, you're not being successful, of course you come to hate it, right? It makes you feel bad. So one of the things that I think secondary teachers always struggle with is motivation.
Yeah.
So even if you put aside that students struggle to read, you get better at it if you're motivated. So it's not, I would argue potentially, that students are not reading less. It's just that they're reading less of what we think they should be reading. So maybe nobody's reading great literature, but I can guarantee that they're reading something, even if it's snippets on, texts or social media, or I have a friend who is a grandmother, and she said that she hosted her grandson and his friends, and they're not great readers in the traditional sense. But they were playing Dungeons and Dragons, and boy, did that book come out and someone said, "Oh, it's a frog, you can't have X, Y, and Z." And she said, my gosh, they were reading, right? But they were just not reading stuff that she might have wanted them to read. So were they reading Shakespeare, Thomas Hardy? No. But were they reading the Dungeons and Dragons rulebook? Absolutely. And I found the same thing true when I taught 10th grade. So usually young men who just was like, "Oh no, miss, thank you so much, I'm not going to be reading it." One thing when they hit about 15 and a half, every one of them back then had rolled up in their back pocket was a driver's ed manual because they wanted that driver permit. Yeah. So suddenly they weren't reading the plays that I wanted them, the poetry that I wanted them to read, but they were reading the driver manual.
Do you think what we have is a misconception of what is reading?
I think what Mira said is really interesting because in the classes that I'm teaching this summer, we're reading some articles and books by Marianne Wolfe, who's a pretty big name in the field of reading. And one of her points that really struck me, which goes along with what Mira was just saying, is that we're actually reading more than we've ever read now, but we're not comprehending, and we're not investing emotionally into what we're reading because everything is so quick and so rapidly available that we just skim and scroll through it because that's what we're presented with now. So, I think her number was crazy. Like, we're reading 4 times more words than we've ever read before, even kids, but they're not comprehending because they don't need to. They can scroll by something. They can just click instantly.
That makes sense because there's at a certain age, when we use the phone, we use it as a phone. But there's a whole generation that gets put out if you use a cell phone for its original purpose. But they're texting. Well, that means they're writing and they're reading.
Yeah, they're texting, they're reading more. They're just not, because everything just happens so quickly and they can move on to the next post or the next thing. They're not necessarily taking in what they're reading. And I think we also see that with older students and even adults. When they see something on the news, they just skim it and take it in. That process of where is this coming from, questioning this, thinking about, is this a reliable source? That's not really there anymore because it's on like we're on source overload. There's so many sources and they're so quick.
Yes, and I'm going to piggyback onto something that Dominic said. You read different ways for different texts and different purposes. So Dominic is not incorrect when he says a lot of our students are using skimming in place of actual deep reading.
Yeah.
Skimming by itself is not necessarily the enemy, right? When I'm looking for something specific in a text, I don't have to read the whole thing. I just need to skim. And then here's the part that I'm looking for. The problem is that the way things flash onto a screen so much, I have the same problem. So I'm old enough that every once in a while I look at Facebook. It's nothing but, post, 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 post. By the time I'm 5 posts down, I'm like, what was the first one? So it's it's, even if I want to remember, I can't because it was too much overload. And so I might look at the first one and go, oh, this is really interesting. I have to do more research on this and look it up, off of Facebook. I need to do some sort of a search. Well, if I don't stop and do it right then and there and keep scrolling, good luck. I won't remember what was so interesting that I thought I should follow up. So I think that happens to our students as well. They're thinking that what type of reading skill and strategy and activity might work for one thing, like social media, they're just assuming, I think, that can work for everything, including deep reading. And of course, we know that's not true. So a part of what we have to do as reading teachers is to teach students that skimming is great for this kind of purpose. And when you're really needing to read something deeper, you've got to use different activities, strategies, etc.
How do we as parents, as aunts, as grandmothers, grandfathers, how do we help our children or the young people in our lives learn the different types of reading and how to be critical readers? If years ago, if we were reading, we would know, even if it was a highlight, okay, I'm dating myself, a highlight magazine, and you have the good one and you had the bad one, the bad character. Remember, there was the goodie and the not goodie.
Yeah.
That taught me how the not good character was an unreliable source.
Right.
If you're reading literature, How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Again, was he a reliable source initially, or was he not a reliable source? We didn't know that terminology at the time. We just know, should we trust what he says, or should we not trust what he says? How do we learn to teach our children those critical skills that they need when they finally get out into the real world, or when they want to enjoy something on it? The power went out, but hey, I've got a flashlight or a candle, and I can.
Right. So that's the nice thing about the written word that's not connected to, I think, a digital source, right?
Yeah.
It is still technology, but it's low technology that doesn't require electricity. And so that's part of the reason why when people say, oh, I don't have to read anymore, I just have to watch the video. I'm like, no, you're still going to have to learn how to read. And in fact, you're going to run into all kinds of roadblocks later on in life if you really don't know how to read and write. So that is definitely a skill that is, even if you think you're going to be a plumber or a veterinarian or whatever it is that you think, oh, no, miss, I don't need to because I'm going to paint houses. I'm like, oh, no, I'm pretty sure if you're going to go into business for yourself and you want a contract, who's going to write that? How are you going to read that? How are you going to sign it? So even if it's just for purposes that don't seem fun to you, you're going to need to know a certain level of reading and writing. I'm totally generalizing, but it's still true even though I'm generalizing. One of the things that you can do to assist students is to go ahead and help them to become wide readers. That is the number one thing they don't want to do. So same 10th grade class, I'd say, okay, so we're going to read this, and they're going to be the opposites, and there's always a student who says, miss, why we got to read this? We ain't good readers. I'm like, guess what the answer is? More reading, which was not popular. So part of it is reading a wide variety of texts, short, long, different viewpoints, different types of sources, biographies, novels, informational texts, etc. So we're finding that that helps, believe it or not, just that act alone helps students to start to discern, these two are about the same topic, but they took different viewpoints. I don't know now. So obviously some talking and discussing helps. I think also what assists students to become better readers is doing it consistently every day. So even if it's just 20 minutes, right? Practice does help a lot. So having to just become, getting accustomed to reading actually assists them as well. And both of those are things that students do not want to do. And I don't blame them. I'm supposed to exercise and do it 20 minutes a day, and I don't. So I get it, though. I get it. But unfortunately, that is partly the way to do it. And then I know friends who read with their students, and then they have some of those discussions after and say, why do you think this person was, shall we say, more reliable than the other? Explain it to me.
And I
At
think
the younger age,
and I want to, to everything Mira said for our middle and high school, and even a lot of what she said is applicable to elementary students, because one way we can really engage elementary students is with wide reading when we kind of go back to teaching things in like a thematic unit format. Like, for example, okay, we're going to learn about the rainforest, and then you actually build the background knowledge they need so they can be successful when they're reading these more advanced texts on one topic. You're not jumping from topic to topic to topic. And you can also tie in a lot of social engagement with that. Like, oh, by the way, look at all this deforestation happening. That's a big word for a second grader, but if you've been reading about rainforests for 2 weeks, they'll know what that means, and you can do classroom projects like, let's make some type of news release about why we need to stop deforestation. We can do a fundraiser. All of that stuff they like because it's like they feel like it's real life. So they like that. And I think another thing that's really important with our young readers, but even our secondary students, is there was this, and there still is amongst teachers and maybe parents, this misconception that phonics and letters and sounds is not fun. That, this is like drill and kill. It's not fun. It's going to be boring. Actually, elementary kids, they like that stuff. They like the phonics games. They like the letter sound correspondence, because that's one of the, I don't want to say few areas in literacy where we can bring in like the manipulatives, like the letter tiles, the dice, the things that you clap with your fingers. I forgot what they're called. But unfortunately, in literacy, we're never going to be like the science experiments where we're going to bring in all the test tubes and beakers and stuff. But we can bring in manipulatives when you're doing phonics, fluency, foundational skills, decoding, and teaching kids to like attack the letters and sounds, to actually sound them out, which is very beneficial. A lot of teachers and parents are under the belief that we don't want to ask the kids to sound out the words anymore, but they need to do that. So that way, when they get to secondary and they get to these challenging content area words, memorization isn't going to work for that. They need to be able to sound out those words.
Absolutely. And sometimes sounding out doesn't work, but that's okay. You have to have a variety of strategies then. So we'll try it this way. Oh, it didn't help out. Okay, let's try the second way. That didn't help. Oh, the third way worked. I mean, that's what we actually as expert readers do, but we just do it so fast in our heads that we don't even realize we did that. So if I asked you, how'd you know that word? You're like, oh, I just read it. But what you probably did was a couple of different strategies that just went super fast. I want to go ahead and amplify something that Dominic said, and this is our other soap box. But yes, drill and kill is very rarely. There are some circumstances where I'm sure drill and kill probably is useful, but when it comes to teaching reading, drill and kill is not as useful as just really good, engaging instruction. So for sure, that's also what another generalization is, that oftentimes a wide teaching of different activities and strategies for reading is really what works, but you have to have solid teachers who know what they're doing.
I remember growing up, now I'm much older than you guys, but my grandmother had been a nursery school teacher before that period of time when you could no longer work when she got married. But she would make, I will confess, I started reading when I was 3, okay?
Yeah.
So, but and my mother, believe it or not, only had a 9th grade education, was a migrant worker, but she loved to read. And because English was not her first language, often the words she pronounced, she would read them phonetically, but she didn't pronounce them appropriately because English is an amalgamation of a million different languages, and what is pronounced, pronunciation of a GH alone is enough to kill someone. But I do remember the fun things that would happen. My grandmother would make games, almost like bingo, for getting the phonetics of letters, and you'd get a prize. And it wouldn't be you're getting a cookie, but you'd get you get to help me bake today, and you're going to read the instructions, or let's go look for all the things that start with an S or a C, and some things would be a CH. But there's a C there, isn't there? But it would be a treasure hunt. Yeah. We don't do that anymore. Or should we do that?
It's starting to come back now because now there is a very strong push to emphasize foundational skills, which are like your phonics, phonological awareness, and fluency, especially in elementary school. We're seeing a lot of new state legislation coming out that's saying that teachers need to be trained in effective ways to teach reading, to Mira's point. So that's something that's kind of coming down the pipe. And then teachers in general are just hungry for this information because they feel like in a way they've kind of been robbed from their training because they might not have gotten the best teacher training on how to teach reading in their teacher prep program for a variety of reasons. But they are in general very hungry for this information. And I know from the summer programs that we've done, when we get them here, they're engaged. They are highly engaged, and they take teaching reading very seriously, and they want to do better.
And what can I, as a parent, do? And by the way, this is your water.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, as a parent, for sure, you're going to have to go ahead and, assist your students to read. Maybe the way you start is to find something that they are interested in topically, and then go ahead and get them started on that. And hopefully it's a fun topic, right? It's not like necessarily astrophysics or something, unless the student finds it fun. But reading with them and then having discussions is really the best. Even if you can't do that, though, there are certain things that you can mimic. So let's say you are making dinner. Your student is in middle school reading at the table and says, okay, I'm done. Well, one of the things you can say is, okay, what you just read, can you just tell me, in using your own words, what you think you read? Fantastic. Now, can you go ahead and make it shorter? So tell me what you just read, but just do that in like a sentence or two. So yeah, you're going to have to go ahead and, oh, is it hard? Okay, well, that's okay. Well, just tell me what the main ideas are then. Okay, then after that, tell me what you thought was good about it. Like, what did you like? And was there anything that you didn't like? So even asking just those kinds of questions while you're busy making dinner and your students thinking about it and trying to answer, that really does push the comprehension along, and then also a certain amount of connection and some critical thinking. What the student likes and what the student doesn't like, especially if they've got reasons, and then pushing it up and following it up and saying, okay, when you said that the author said that, can you find that again and tell me, did the author really say that? Oh, he did. Okay, great. So now why did you not like that part again? So, asking them, those the types of questions that actually we as good readers usually ask ourselves. So what you're doing is you're modeling on the outside what an expert reader does for themselves and may not even recognize it. I mean, there's lots of different variations of questions. There's, lots of different things you can ask, but usually starting out by trying to help the student, comprehend and then move to either connecting or critically thinking about the text is possibly an easier way to start. CSUN's secondary education, the single subject program, for decades has done what Dominic says is so important, and which is to have a class dedicated to literacy. So the focus in this literacy class for teacher, prep at the secondary level has really been reading, although there's the listening, speaking, and writing as well. And so oftentimes we get folks, students who say, I'm going to be a math teacher. I really don't want to teach reading. And it's like, oh no, you're going to be teaching it whether you like it or not. You're just going to be teaching it in math. We don't want you to write essays necessarily. We don't need you to read plays about math, even if they exist. But how is your student going to go ahead and read and write mathematically? Or what are they going to do in physics? What are they going to do in world languages? How are they going to do this in PE, soccer, music? So one of the things that sometimes we get a little pushback on just in education is when teachers of content areas that are not English language arts and usually not history, social science think, oh, I don't, you seem very nice, but I don't think I need to teach reading. And I say, okay, well, let's wait until we get through the class, and also let's take a look. You'll ideally be much happier once you start student teaching because you're going to be teaching content reading.
And unfortunately, we get that same belief in elementary school because you'll have teachers, and a lot of elementary schools now are moving into like a departmentalized model. So like especially in upper elementary, 4th and 5th grade, you might have teachers that are the science teacher or the math teacher. And very often they'll have this belief to what Mira is saying is that, oh no, I'm not the reading teacher. But they are the reading teacher. They're just teaching reading through that content lens.
Aren't the prompts? Don't you have to read the prompt, the instruction for your?
Yes, but
for whatever the assignment is, you got to add. You've got two trains
reason,
going this direction. You got two trains going.
It's so funny because for whatever reason, as soon as they embrace that content area, in their mind, it's like, oh well, I don't have to teach that reading anymore. I'm teaching math. The other teachers will teach some reading, which is not true at all, and that is a big challenge sometimes in elementary school. So
that's the key where comprehension comes in.
The content area, yes.
Yeah, the content comprehension, because that's still reading to understand your instructions to.
Yeah, or even the textbook.
Yeah.
Right? So every once in a while, I look at a teacher who says, oh no, we don't read the front part because it's too hard. We're just doing the problems in the back. Now that's happening less than it used to, at least in my own personal experience. But every once in a while I still get someone. I said, if you're not teaching the front part, what other math teacher is going to teach that? Like you're the only math teacher with them this year. So believe it or not, they think, oh, well, the English teacher will. I said, no. The English teacher is too busy teaching the novels, the plays, the nonfiction. There's no time to teach how to read the math book. Plus, the English teacher has a different schema. They're not math content people. They're English language arts content people. So, sometimes math books are organized. I'm an ELA person, English language arts. I don't understand how this math book is organized. I bet, though, if I asked a mathematician, does this make any sense? They would say, of course it makes sense. First, but that's the reason why that person needs to teach that, for instance, textbook, right? I mean, it doesn't have to just be textbook. That was my example. But of course, since it makes sense to them. But that's also sometimes in some ways that we, as expert readers, are the worst reading teachers on the planet because it feels so natural to us, right? So for sure, when I first started out teaching all those years ago, and I thought, oh my gosh, my students can't read, what the heck are you going to do? My advice was, okay, just look at it again. Well, that didn't really work. sometimes that actually does work, right? If you've got a certain level of reading ability, sometimes rereading, you're like, oh, shame on me, I totally misread or I missed this, okay? But when students are struggling to a certain degree, just rolling their eyes over again doesn't really work.
All you're doing is reinforcing that I didn't get it the first time.
Yes, and thank you so much. And now I'm going to lie about it and say, oh, yeah, no, I read it again, miss, and I didn't really. So that's when I think the activities, the strategies, the breaking down, the metacognition, the practicing of it, the trying to, all of that. And that's usually when, as Dominic says, we have to keep the motivation high.